Welcome to the Deep Dive. We have a truly expansive and I think profoundly important conversation ahead of us today.
We really do.
But before we get into the weeds, I want to ask you, the listener, to take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe to the show. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing you these ultra-long, incisive, and fascinating explorations of the ideas shaping our world.
Yeah, that really helps us out.
Today we are reviewing a compelling and highly provocative new ebook that has been making serious waves. It's called From Isolation to Initiation: Loneliness as a Rite of Passage for Men, and it's by Conrad Reicher.
Right.
And I just want to tell you right out of the gate to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy this book for yourself. And make sure you follow the author, at Conrad Reicher, on Substack for more of his ongoing insights.
It's definitely a text you'll want to have in front of you.
Exactly. Now, to set the stage for you, the listener, if you are a man navigating the modern world and you're feeling a deep, unspoken sense that traditional masculinity is under attack, or if you identify with men's rights advocacy, the red-pilled community, and the broader manosphere, let me be very clear. This book is written specifically for you.
It speaks directly to that experience.
It does. We are going to embark on an extensive, unapologetic exploration of Reicher's core premise. We'll be looking at exactly how modern institutions have fundamentally shifted away from traditional male roles, the deep history of those institutions before they were captured by what the author describes as modern feminist and Marxist ideologies, and most importantly, how men can reclaim their power and purpose.
It is a massive text to tackle. And before we really start unpacking the details, I think it's crucial to set some ground rules for our discussion today.
For sure.
We are going to be exploring some highly charged political, cultural, and biological themes in this deep dive. Reicher presents some very direct, unfiltered critiques of modern feminism, egalitarianism, and contemporary cultural structures.
He doesn't hold back.
He really doesn't. So I want to make it explicitly clear to you, the listener, that we are not here to take sides, nor are we explicitly endorsing these viewpoints. Our role today is to impartially report on Reicher's arguments. We are here to act as your guides, unpacking the fascinating psychology, the evolutionary biology, and historical context presented in this source text.
Right, so you can understand the ideas exactly as the author intended and weigh them for yourself.
Exactly.
I think that's the perfect framing.
Yeah.
So our mission for this deep dive is to truly understand the mechanics of this crisis as Reicher sees it. Why are men today experiencing loneliness at historically unprecedented rates? How has modern culture weaponized masculinity? And ultimately, what is the roadmap?
How to turn that pain into something useful.
Yes. How do you turn the agonizing pain of modern isolation into a powerful, transformative rite of passage? So let's start where Reicher starts, with the cultural hostility men face today and what he calls the double bind of vulnerability.
That's a great place to start.
Reicher argues that there is an active, pervasive war on masculinity. He points out that if you look at the media landscape, Hollywood, advertising, television, men are almost exclusively portrayed in one of two distinct categories.
Right, there's no nuance.
Zero. They're either bumbling, incompetent fools like the classic beta male sitcom dad who's essentially an overgrown child, or they are portrayed as hyper-aggressive, toxic villains. There is simply no middle ground for the noble, competent patriarch.
And what's fascinating here is how Reicher connects those superficial media portrayals to a much deeper psychological trap. Researchers actually refer to this as the double bind.
Double bind.
Yeah. Society has placed men in a behavioral paradox with basically no visible exit. On one hand, the traditional expectation remains firmly in place. Society demands that men be stoic, unshakable pillars of strength. They are expected to be the rocks upon which the family and society are built.
Right.
But on the other hand, the modern cultural narrative constantly urges men to do the work, to open up, to cry, and to be deeply emotionally vulnerable.
It's completely contradictory.
It is, and Reicher argues this is a rigged game. He introduces the concept of the man box.
The man box, yeah, I found this part really interesting.
So if you are inside this box, displaying traditional stoicism and strength, you are instantly pathologized. You are labeled as toxic, emotionally stunted, or domineering. But the moment you step outside the box and display raw emotion, fear, or vulnerability, you are penalized just as harshly.
You're punished for doing exactly what they asked you to do.
Precisely. You are labeled as weak, and the people around you often unconsciously lose respect for you.
I want to push on that a little bit, though, because I hear this critique a lot. Is Reicher saying that men shouldn't be vulnerable at all? Or is he saying that society is just being hypocritical about what it actually wants from men?
He's arguing the latter. It's the hypocrisy that causes the psychological damage. Riker isn't saying men don't have emotions or shouldn't process them.
Right.
He's saying that the modern mandate for men to express their emotions exactly the way women express theirs is a trap. And the data he brings to the table is incredibly sobering. He points out that men account for nearly 80% of all suicides.
80%. That is a staggering statistic.
It cuts across demographics, and it really illustrates the fatal toll of this double bind. Men are suffering, they're told to speak up, but when they do, they are punished.
The book uses a specific story to illustrate this, and it's one that I think a lot of listeners will instantly recognize. It's the story of a 35-year-old accountant named Mark.
Mark's story is heartbreaking.
It really is. So Mark is navigating this exact tightrope in his marriage. His wife was going through an intense, prolonged period of career instability and stress. Initially, Mark tried to be the traditional stoic rock. He absorbed the stress, managed the household logistics, and tried not to burden her with his own anxieties.
Doing what he thought he was supposed to do.
Exactly. And her response? She accused him of being emotionally distant, cold, and unsupportive because he wasn't matching her emotional frequency.
Right, and Mark's story perfectly encapsulates the trap. Because what happens next? Mark internalizes that feedback.
He listens to her.
He decides to be vulnerable. He finally opens up to his wife about his own deep-seated insecurities regarding his career, his fear of failure, and his overwhelming anxiety about their financial future. And her reaction shifts entirely.
She recoils.
She tells him that she feels burdened by his emotions. She essentially implies that she needs him to be strong and that his vulnerability is too much for her to handle on top of her own issues.
He literally couldn't win.
Riker uses this to demonstrate that men are endlessly told to be emotionally intelligent, but when they actually reveal their raw, unpolished fears, they are penalized for it. Their partners, according to Riker's analysis, often experience a visceral loss of attraction and security.
And this double bind isn't just playing out in private domestic spaces either. It is reflected and magnified in our grand cultural narrative.
Oh, absolutely.
Riker points to the evolution of modern superheroes, specifically looking at the Marvel Cinematic Universe over the last 15 years or so. Take Captain America. Historically, he was the archetype of unapologetic, righteous, masculine authority.
The quintessential good guy.
Right. But in modern iterations, he is constantly framed as a man out of time, a relic whose old-school virtues of duty, physical protection, and stoicism are somehow problematic or naive. And then you look at Iron Man.
Another great example.
He is portrayed as a deeply flawed anti-hero who is constantly forced to apologize for his masculine ego, his ambition, and his assertiveness.
Exactly. And Riker brings this directly into the real world by analyzing the media treatment of figures like Elon Musk. He argues that when a male leader displays intense world-bending ambition, extreme drive, and a demanding nature, which are deeply traditional masculine traits, it is almost universally framed by the modern media apparatus as toxic, dangerous, or erratic.
But if a woman does it,
that's the double standard Riker points out. If a female leader displays those exact same traits, she is featured on magazine covers and celebrated as a fierce, barrier-breaking trailblazer. The traits themselves aren't the problem. The fact that they reside in a man is what modern culture finds objectionable.
So if we look at this from the perspective of you, the listener, what is the practical outcome of this cultural hostility? According to the book, the outcome is a mass exodus.
And men are just walking away.
They are looking at the societal institutions, marriage, the corporate ladder, higher education, even modern dating. And they're opting out. They're retreating into isolation because the game feels rigged. Why participate in a system that demands your utility but despises your nature?
Which is a very logical response when you frame it that way.
It is. And that retreat perfectly sets up what I found to be the most intellectually aggressive part of the book, Riker's deconstruction of the myth of gender equality.
This is undoubtedly Riker's most controversial yet foundational argument. He argues that the modern concept of gender equality, specifically the idea of the blank slate, which suggests that men and women are exactly the same except for societal conditioning, is a dangerous myth because it fundamentally ignores biological reality.
He goes deep into the biology.
He leans heavily into evolutionary biology here. He asserts that men and women are profoundly, beautifully, and immutably wired differently. Men, fueled by drastically higher levels of testosterone and different neurochemical pathways, are biologically hardwired to lead, to protect, and to provide.
Not a social construct.
Right. According to Riker, this isn't some arbitrary social construct invented by a patriarchy. It's an evolutionary imperative that ensured the survival of early human tribes in incredibly hostile environments. Women, conversely, are wired with higher baseline levels of oxytocin, the bonding hormone which fosters nurturing, deep social cohesion, and the raising of vulnerable infants.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, though, because the obvious counterargument modern culture would make is that we don't live in hunter-gatherer tribes anymore. We have grocery stores, police forces, and air conditioning. Why does Riker believe these ancient biological imperatives still matter in a modern, technologically advanced society?
That is exactly the tension Riker explores. He argues that while our environment has changed rapidly over the last few hundred years, our evolutionary biology has not.
We're basically cavemen with iPhones.
Exactly. We are walking around modern cities with Pleistocene brains. And when societies try to forcefully abandon this natural complementary order and mandate strict interchangeable egalitarianism, they don't liberate their citizens. Instead, Riker argues, they cause profound psychological harm, particularly to men's mental health.
Which brings us to the Swedish paradox. I found this section absolutely fascinating. Sweden is universally held up as the gold standard, the absolute utopia of egalitarianism and gender equality. But Riker uses it as a cautionary tale.
He does. The Swedish paradox highlights a glaring contradiction. Sweden has engineered its society to be as equal as possible through legislation, generous parental leave for fathers, and intense cultural conditioning.
They've done everything right by the modern progressive standard.
Yes. Yet, Riker points to the data showing that men in Sweden suffer from incredibly high rates of loneliness, depression, and a general lack of existential purpose. He attributes this to confusing, deeply unnatural dual expectations.
How so?
Well, in Sweden, a man is expected by the state and the culture to be an exactly equal partner in all domestic and childcare duties, to essentially embody a maternal role. But, and this is the crux of it, underneath that progressive veneer, female biological selection hasn't changed.
Right.
Women still subtly, instinctively expect their male partners to fulfill the traditional provider and protector role. The men are caught in an invisible tug-of-war between state-mandated egalitarianism and innate human biology, leaving them feeling inadequate, exhausted, and profoundly adrift.
It's a fascinating way to look at it. And Riker doesn't just look at modern examples either. He looks at the broad sweep of history to ask what actually happens when a society abandons these distinct natural roles. He points to the fall of Rome.
A classic historical example.
Now, historians have debated this for centuries, but Riker's thesis is that Rome didn't just collapse because of external barbarian invasions. It crumbled from within. He argues that as Rome became incredibly wealthy and secure, the elite Roman men abandoned their traditional roles as the hardened protectors and austere providers of the Republic.
You got soft.
They outsourced their defense to mercenaries and retreated into decadence, luxury, and philosophical egalitarianism. When the hard men disappeared, the society fell.
He contrasts that decadent decline with the Yanomami tribe in the Amazon basin. Anthropologists have studied the Yanomami extensively because they are one of the few remaining isolated societies. In their culture, the role of male protection isn't an abstract concept. It is the absolute bloody center of their survival. The men hunt, and they violently defend the village from rival tribes. Without that strong, unapologetically fierce male protector role, the entire tribe would be wiped out in a matter of weeks.
There's no room for a blank slate theory there.
None at all. Riker also points to the Spartans of ancient Greece, a civilization built entirely on the absolute necessity of male strength, intense brotherhood, and warrior duty. For the Spartans, masculinity wasn't toxic. It was the shield that kept their families alive.
Bringing this historical lens back to the modern day, Riker discusses the psychological fallout of the Me Too movement. And again, just to remind you, the listener, we are impartially reporting Riker's framing of this cultural event. He argues that while the movement may have been sparked by legitimate instances of abuse, it rapidly metastasized into a cultural dynamic that fundamentally terrified men out of asserting their natural leadership instincts.
And that's where he brings in the Pence rule effect.
Exactly. The resulting environment, often referred to in corporate circles as the Pence rule effect, made men deeply afraid to take risks, to mentor young female colleagues, or to be appropriately assertive. It was born out of a paralyzing fear that any display of traditional masculine authority would be misinterpreted and labeled as predatory or toxic.
And if you extrapolate that fear and suppression, you see the most devastating results, not just in the corporate world, but in our education system. Riker spends a significant amount of time unpacking the boys' crisis.
The statistics here are just awful.
The data is undeniable. Boys are currently 30% more likely to drop out of high school than girls. They make up a massive minority of college enrollments. Why is this happening? Riker argues that the modern educational framework has been completely feminized.
It rewards traits that are biologically easier for young girls.
Exactly. Classrooms demand absolute compliance, sitting still for 8 hours a day, and passive learning. This system actively pathologizes and punishes boys' natural biological imperatives, their need for physical movement, their innate competitiveness, and their aggressive energy.
Instead of harnessing that energy, we drug it.
Yes, we drug it with ADHD medication and tell boys that their core nature is a disorder.
So let's connect these dots. We have a culture that is actively hostile to traditional masculinity. We have a society insisting that biological differences are a myth, and an education system that punishes boys for acting like boys. This raises a critical question for you, the listener.
It's the central question of the book, really.
If men are biologically wired to lead, to protect, and to conquer, what happens when they are denied a tribe to protect? What happens when those core ancient archetypes are systematically stripped out of their lives? Riker argues they become lost. And this leads us to his exploration of absent archetypes, specifically focusing on the devastation of fatherlessness and what he calls the feminine shadow.
Riker leans heavily on Jungian psychology to explain this, specifically the framework of the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. He focuses primarily on the king archetype.
The king.
In Jungian terms, the king represents the stabilizing force of a society. The king brings wisdom, authority, order, and responsibility. He is the one who provides the blessing to the younger men, initiating them into adulthood. But when a boy grows up without a father, which is an epidemic in the modern West, he isn't just missing a physical presence in the house or an extra paycheck.
He's missing the emotional roadmap to adulthood. Riker argues that emotional fatherlessness is the real hidden tragedy. Even if a father is physically present, if he has been beaten down by the cultural hostility we just discussed, if he is passive and disconnected, he is emotionally absent.
He's not embodying the king.
Exactly. Without a strong king figure to model that delicate, necessary balance of raw strength and tempered wisdom, boys are left completely guessing what it means to be a man. They have no anchor. And the statistics Riker pulls to support this are chilling. Boys raised without fathers in the home are twice as likely to drop out of high school.
Twice as likely.
They are twice as likely to end up in the prison system. They are navigating an incredibly treacherous path without a compass, and society blames them when they inevitably get lost.
But Riker's analysis doesn't stop at the absent father. He also explores the necessary counterpart, which he terms the feminine shadow. Riker argues that modern feminism's intense, decades-long push for women to prioritize corporate career advancement, financial independence, and hyper-individualism over motherhood and family building has left a massive psychological void in the culture.
It disrupted the balance.
Remember his biological premise. Men are evolutionarily wired to protect and seek out feminine, nurturing energy. The masculine finds its purpose in protecting the feminine. But when that distinct feminine energy is absent, when women are conditioned to behave like corporate men, and the traditional role of the mother and the nurturing partner is diminished or mocked as subservient, men are left without their biological counterbalance.
Which Riker argues leaves men emotionally stunted and purposeless.
Exactly.
This is a heavy critique, and the data he pulls to back it up is fascinating. He cites a comprehensive Cambridge study from the 1990s showing that men who are raised without a stable, nurturing mother figure are 3 times more likely to experience chronic, debilitating loneliness in adulthood. 3 times.
That's a massive correlation.
The absence of that fundamental nurturing energy creates a lifelong wound. And Riker points out that this cultural shift deeply affects women too. He shares the story of Sarah, a high-powered corporate lawyer in her early 40s. Sarah spent her entire 20s and 30s fiercely climbing the corporate ladder, working 80-hour weeks, doing exactly what modern culture and lean-in feminism told her would bring her empowerment and happiness.
And what is her reality now, according to the book? She finds herself single, her biological window for children rapidly closing or already shut, and she is grappling with a profound, unshakable sense of emptiness and regret.
She realizes the lie.
She realizes that her prestigious title and her bank account cannot comfort her. Riker uses Sarah's story as a poignant illustration of his claim that feminism sold women an empty, unnatural promise of having it all. It told them they could ignore their biological clocks and their innate nurturing instincts. In reality, biology is a harsh master, and choices must always be made.
So you look at this deeply fractured landscape. You have generations of men who lack the guidance and initiation of the king archetype, and who are simultaneously starved of the nurturing complementary balance of the mother archetype. Where do they turn?
They look for substitutes.
When you are drowning in isolation, you grab onto anything that floats. Riker argues that men turn to false idols to fill that profound void. They try to cure their loneliness through two primary avenues, romantic salvation and the digital void. And Riker makes the case that both of these attempts are doomed to fail miserably.
Let's unpack the illusion of romantic salvation first. There is a deeply pervasive myth in our culture, endlessly fed to us by romantic comedies, pop music, and literature, that finding the right woman can fix a broken man. It's the idea that a man's internal chaos can be organized by external love.
Classic Hollywood trope.
Right. Riker completely dismantles this notion. He points out that entering a relationship in order to cure your own loneliness only creates a toxic dynamic of deep emotional dependency. You are placing an impossible burden on the woman to act as your therapist, your mother, and your savior.
It's too much weight for one person.
And emotional dependency is a fundamentally fragile foundation. It inevitably repels the partner and leads to a cycle of failed, increasingly desperate relationships.
The book shares the story of John to illustrate this trap. John is a successful software engineer, but he is fundamentally alone. He spent years jumping frantically from one serious relationship to the next. He was entirely convinced that if he could just find the perfect partner, he would finally feel complete and his deep-seated loneliness would vanish.
But it never works out that way.
Never. After every single breakup, the quiet would rush back in, and he found himself feeling even lonelier and more hollow than before. What John eventually realized, and what Riker wants you, the listener, to deeply internalize, is that you cannot outsource your emotional stability.
You have to build it yourself.
John had to stop dating. He had to develop absolute self-reliance. He had to build his own inner kingdom and find his own strength before he could ever hope to be a healthy contributing partner. A woman cannot cure male loneliness. It is strictly an internal job.
That is a harsh but necessary truth. But if women aren't the cure, technology is arguably a much more dangerous poison. Riker's exploration of what he calls digital loneliness is genuinely eye-opening, especially when you look at the sheer scale of the problem.
The screen time data is wild.
He notes that the average man's screen time has skyrocketed over the last decade to more than 4 hours a day of non-work-related scrolling. We are staring into a device that Riker calls a hall of mirrors. Social media platforms are practically engineered to breed constant, soul-crushing comparison.
You're just looking at everyone else's highlight reel.
You are sitting alone in your room, measuring your raw, unfiltered, mundane reality against the highly curated, edited, and often entirely fake highlight reels of other men's wealth, physiques, and lifestyles.
It creates a profound, paralyzing sense of inadequacy. But the digital void goes so much deeper and gets so much darker when Riker brings up the topic of modern pornography. This isn't a moral judgment from Riker, it's a neurological one.
It's about brain chemistry.
He argues that high-speed internet porn is actively, physically rewiring the male brain. It hijacks the evolutionary dopamine reward system. It trains the brain to expect instant, effortless intimacy and endless novelty. The Coolidge effect on overdrive, all without requiring any of the actual emotional risk, physical effort, or vulnerability that is required to forge a real human relationship.
The neurological impact is terrifying. Studies have shown actual gray matter reduction in the brains of heavy users, alongside dopamine receptor desensitization. The book introduces us to Mark, a man entirely trapped in a cycle of digital porn addiction.
A different Mark from earlier.
Right. This Mark would come home from his stressful, unfulfilling job, open his laptop, and completely lose himself in artificial fantasies. It was the path of least resistance. But over time, his real-world social skills literally atrophied.
Use it or lose it.
Exactly. When he did try to date or interact with real women, he experienced crippling performance anxiety and an inability to connect emotionally. He couldn't form real relationships because the digital substitute had rewired his brain to reject the slow, messy reality of human connection.
It is a self-imposed digital prison, and it extends beyond porn to the entire modern online ecosystem. Riker cites a survey that I found absolutely shocking. 62% of men report that they are afraid to share their true political or social opinions online, or even in the workplace, due to the very real fear of cancel culture.
62%.
Think about the implications of that. More than half of all men in society are actively silencing themselves. They are performing a socially acceptable pantomime. This creates a massive society-wide chilling effect on male expression. It drives men further into profound isolation because they feel they cannot be their authentic selves, they cannot speak their minds without facing social or financial execution. They are physically in a crowd, but intellectually and emotionally in solitary confinement.
So, up to this point, we have painted a very stark, almost dystopian picture of the modern male experience. We've covered cultural hostility, the denial of fundamental biology, the collapse of initiating archetypes, and the trap of digital prisons.
That's heavy stuff.
But what makes Riker's book so compelling is that he doesn't leave the reader wallowing in despair or victimhood. He pivots hard into solutions. He provides a highly structured, historically grounded roadmap for breaking out of this isolation. This brings us to the core of his actionable advice: reclaiming institutions through brotherhood, mission, and tradition. If you want to break out of the digital prison, Riker says, you have to find your tribe.
Okay, let's unpack this roadmap, because this is where you, the listener, can actually start applying these ideas. Step one is brotherhood. But why do men specifically need a tribe? Why can't they just go to therapy or talk to their wives?
Well, Riker goes right back to the biology we discussed earlier. While female oxytocin is often released through face-to-face nurturing and verbal communication, Riker points out that male oxytocin, the bonding hormone that creates trust and loyalty, is primarily released through shared physical exertion and shared risk toward a common goal.
Face-to-face versus shoulder-to-shoulder.
Exactly. Men don't deeply bond by sitting in a circle and talking about their feelings. They bond shoulder to shoulder, working toward a shared purpose, lifting something heavy, or facing a physical threat together.
That is a crucial biological distinction that modern therapy often completely misses, and it leads directly into what Riker calls the purpose paradox. To explain this, he draws heavily on the monumental work of Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who wrote Man's Search for Meaning.
Incredible book.
Frankl observed in the death camps that humans are not driven primarily by a Freudian desire for pleasure, but by a deep existential pursuit of meaning. Riker applies this to modern men. For a man, a mission is not a luxury or a hobby. It is a psychological necessity for survival. A man without a mission will destroy himself.
And look at the modern world we've built. The gig economy, for example, completely strips men of a stable, long-term identity. Bouncing from driving an Uber to delivering food without any long-term security, mastery, or a clear role as a provider within a community leaves men feeling completely commodified, useless, and adrift.
Without a mission, men wither. But when they anchor themselves to ancient, uncompromising virtues, things like honor, courage, physical endurance, and stoicism, they find their footing. Riker points to historical brotherhoods to show how this was systematized in the past. We talked earlier about the Spartanagoge, the brutal years-long training system that stripped boys of their individualism and forged unbreakable bonds of brotherhood through shared suffering.
He also mentions the Knights Templar.
Right, they were bound by incredibly strict rituals, asceticism, and a shared, dangerous mission. And looking closer to our own time, he looks at the Freemasons and other fraternal orders. In the early 20th century, roughly 1 in 5 American men belonged to a fraternal order.
1 in 5. That's a massive cultural force.
They weren't just drinking clubs, they were mutual aid societies. They built hospitals, provided life insurance before the government did, and most importantly, they held each other to moral and physical standards. They were builders, elevating their communities and each other.
But as Riker notes, those massive institutions have largely collapsed or been watered down today. So what are the modern equivalents? How does a man listening to this right now find that brotherhood? Riker highlights the men's shed movement, which originated in Australia and is spreading globally.
I love that concept.
It's brilliant. It provides a physical, practical space for men to gather, share tools and skills, work on mechanical or woodworking projects, and organically support each other side by side, perfectly aligning with that male oxytocin release mechanism. He also points to historical examples of small, localized, purpose-driven groups like Benjamin Franklin's Junto Club.
Franklin was ahead of his time.
Franklin started it with just a dozen men from different trades who were ruthlessly committed to mutual improvement, intellectual debate, and civic duty. They had strict rules for engagement, and even modern physical challenges like Tough Mudder, Spartan races, or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu academies act as contemporary initiation rites. They provide men with that intense, shared physical crucible they biologically crave but cannot find in a cubicle.
The book uses giants of history to prove this point about the absolute necessity of a mission. Steve Jobs wasn't just building microchips and circuit boards. He was driven by a profound, almost fanatical mission to put a dent in the universe. Mahatma Gandhi used extreme asceticism and nonviolent resistance to free an entire subcontinent, driven by an unshakable, transcendent purpose.
They weren't just passing the time.
These men weren't drifting through life looking for comfort. They were steered by a massive mission that anchored their entire existence and commanded the respect and loyalty of their tribe.
Finding a tribe and a mission is essential. But Riker makes a profound, highly introspective pivot for his final argument. He argues that before a man can effectively lead a tribe, before he is worthy of a mission, and before he can conquer the external world, he must first conquer himself.
Right, the internal work.
He has to slay his own dragons, and the only place to do that is in the crucible of absolute solitude. This brings us to the ultimate thesis of the book. Loneliness must be actively transformed from a state of forced, miserable isolation into a state of chosen, empowering initiation.
I absolutely love this distinction, and I think it's the most actionable part of the entire book. Forced isolation is a prison. It's sitting alone in your apartment at 2 a.m., bathed in the blue light of your phone, endlessly scrolling through TikTok, feeling pathetic and feeling sorry for yourself. You are a victim of your circumstances.
But chosen solitude is different.
Chosen solitude is the path of the lone wolf archetype. It is a deliberate, highly intentional, and empowering act of stepping away from the noise, the digital metrics, and the societal expectations to gain absolute clarity and self-mastery. The true lone wolf doesn't step away because he hates society. He steps into the wild to figure out exactly who he is so he can return to his tribe stronger, sharper, and capable of contributing meaningfully.
To achieve this transformation, Riker emphasizes two incredibly powerful ancient tools: nature and silence. Let's look at nature first. Nature is the ultimate leveler. When you are out in the deep wild, the wilderness does not care about your corporate job title, it doesn't care about your bank account, and it certainly doesn't care about your social media followers.
It strips it all away.
It strips away every single layer of modern pretense, comfort, and human ego. If you make a mistake, you suffer the consequences immediately. It forces you to rely entirely on your own primal instincts, your physical strength, and your adaptability. It is a raw, unforgiving confrontation with the absolute truth of who you are when all the modern safety nets are removed.
Riker brings up some incredible historical examples of men who understood this necessity. Henry David Thoreau didn't go to live in a cabin at Walden Pond because he was a misanthrope who hated people. He explicitly stated he went to the woods to live deliberately and to confront the essential, raw facts of life.
Nikola Tesla is another one.
Nikola Tesla, arguably one of the greatest, most paradigm-shifting geniuses in human history, explicitly stated that his mind was only sharp, and his most revolutionary ideas only came to him when he was in prolonged, uninterrupted solitude. And then there's the more extreme, tragic example of Chris McCandless from Into the Wild, or the ancient Native American tradition of the Vision Quest, where a young man is forced to step into the terrifying wilderness completely alone, fasting, to find his spiritual guidance and return as a mature man.
And then, alongside nature, there is the incredible power of silence. We mentioned earlier that the modern brain is under constant assault. We are exposed to over 100,000 words a day through texts, emails, podcasts, and advertisements. The cognitive overload is literally deafening, and it prevents any deep, introspective thought.
Silence is the cure.
Silence is the only antidote, and the biological data Riker presents to back this up is absolutely staggering. He cites a study involving mice and auditory stimuli, which found that just 2 hours of absolute silence a day led to massive neurogenesis, the actual physical growth of brand new brain cells, specifically in the hippocampus, which is the area of the brain associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation.
So it actually heals the brain.
Silence doesn't just give your brain a rest, it literally rebuilds the physical structure of your mind.
Okay, so the theory is sound, the biology backs it up, but how do you, the listener, actually apply this in a world that never stops screaming at you? Riker gives highly actionable, concrete advice here. He says you need to aggressively implement what he calls micro-rituals into your daily life to embrace active silence.
It doesn't mean moving to a cave.
Right, this isn't about moving to a cabin in the woods. It's about taking control of your daily environment. You could be waking up 30 minutes early to sit in absolute silence with your thoughts. No phone, no music, no distractions. It could be taking a freezing cold shower every single morning to force your mind into the absolute present physical moment, triggering that mammalian dive reflex and shocking your nervous system into clarity.
Or getting outside.
It could be going for a strenuous heavy hike in the woods without your smartwatch or your phone. It's about creating intentional, fiercely guarded pockets of silence to confront your inner thoughts, your demons, and your fears, no matter how uncomfortable that confrontation might be.
What is most profound about Riker's conclusion is that he is telling men that the agonizing pain of loneliness they feel right now is actually a feature of their biology, not a bug. It is a signal. It is the intense heat of the forge.
That's a great metaphor.
If you run away from that heat and jump into the numb arms of digital distraction, pornography, or emotional codependency, you will burn to ash and disappear. But if you have the courage to stand in the fire, if you use deliberate solitude, punishing nature, and absolute silence as your anvil, you will forge yourself into a stronger, sharper, more resilient man. You will initiate yourself.
I think that is an incredibly powerful place to bring this all together. Let's summarize the massive amount of ground we've covered in this deep dive. Riker's book, From Isolation to Initiation, argues passionately and without apology that the modern world has systematically dismantled the traditional institutions, cultural roles, and biological realities that men need to survive and thrive.
He lays it all out.
He argues that by deeply understanding your evolutionary imperatives to lead and protect, by actively turning your back on the digital void to seek out real brotherhood and shared physical purpose, and by using the intense pain of solitude as a deliberate forge for self-mastery, you can turn the modern epidemic of male loneliness into a powerful, necessary personal initiation.
And as we close, I want to offer a final reminder. As we stated at the beginning, while the book's views on modern feminism, the myth of gender equality, and traditional biological roles are highly polarizing and deeply provocative, examining them impartially provides us with a truly fascinating, unfiltered window into the current crisis of modern masculinity.
It's important to understand the argument.
Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, Riker forces us to ask very hard, uncomfortable questions about what society has gained and what it has tragically lost in the relentless pursuit of modern cultural shifts.
Absolutely. It has been an incredibly dense, challenging, and a rewarding journey today. I want to remind you, the listener, to please hit that like button and subscribe to the show so you never miss one of these deep dives. I highly, highly recommend that you go buy the ebook we discussed today, From Isolation to Initiation by Conrad Riker. It is available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. Go get your copy, read the data for yourself, and don't forget to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for even more deep, ongoing insights into these critical topics.
To close us out today, I want to leave you with one last question to mull over as you go about your day. Something to explore on your own that builds on the foundation of everything we've just discussed. Imagine if the digital world, the electrical grid, and all our modern, comfortable societal structures were completely erased tomorrow, forcing you out of your home and into the wild with only your bare instincts and the people immediately around you. Which of your ancient, dormant, masculine traits would emerge first to ensure the physical survival of your tribe, and are you doing absolutely anything to cultivate that specific trait today?